As you may have noticed, I tend to like wholesome romances. If something has a couple in a stable relationship and there's no incest or NTR or harem or love triangles or degeneracy, I'm probably going to at least somewhat enjoy it, even if I acknowledge it's probably not very good, objectively speaking. Now, some things in this category I think are good, like Over the Moon for You or Love Shinibu and Other Delusions, but there's other stuff like Banished from Heroes Party, which is probably not good at all, but it's just something I enjoy considering my personal biases. I would say the Saint's magic power is omnipotent, falls somewhere in between the two. It's a show I could see a lot of people liking for its own sake if it's that's your kind of thing. I could definitely see why a lot of people would hate this show and think it's generic and cringy and obnoxious and boring, but for my part, I like it. It's one of those things I like, but I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend it to everybody unless you're somebody who likes this kind of. Like there's shows I could sit down and recommend to just about anybody. Like I think anybody who at least tolerates romantic comedies would like Over the Moon for You, for instance. This is not the case, but let's get into our anime slash light novel. So, The Saint's Magic is Omnipotent is an Isekai, like every other anime that's come out these days. And like an Isekai, our main character, Sai Takanashi, works at a black company. Black companies in Japan are the ones, when you see like the news stories about people in Japan working themselves to death. Pretty much everybody who is in an Isekai either works for a black company or is some kind of neat. That's pretty much the universal rule. I think there's a couple exceptions, but generally speaking, those are the two categories. A lot of them die from a heart attack because they're overworked or something like that. Now, this does not happen to Say. In the first 2 minutes of the episode, she comes home from work and gets sucked in to a portal to another world, and she comes to the kingdom of Solitania. Now, what makes this a little bit different is it turns out that two women were summoned from her world, Ira and Say, obviously. And we very quickly find out that in the world of Solitania, which is basically like your standard RPG, European medieval setting, kind of like Shield Hero or something like that, every couple hundred years, this miasma comes in that brings a huge number of monsters with it. And a woman with basically divine magical powers known as the Saint appears, and her very presence is able to push back the miasma and destroy the monsters. And her abilities also kind of lead the kingdom to a golden age. And there hadn't been a saint in a long time, so they had used a ritual to try to summon one from the other world. And to that end, they summoned both Sai and Ira. Now, the prince immediately decides, because Ira's younger and cuter, that he's going to take Ira, that she's the saint, and he immediately dumps Sai and runs off with her. And she's kind of left to be largely on her own in the palace. Now, I've actually been going through some of the light novel series because they've started publishing light novels on Audible, and there is actually quite a bit of background because in the show they don't show like the behind the scenes chapters, which give a lot of context to stuff. But anyway, so Sei is very like pissed off that the prince just abandoned her. She's summoned into this other world, and she just basically has to sit around all day. And one day she decides to go for a walk, and she comes across a huge garden full of various medicinal herbs. It turns out that the herbs belong to the Medicinal Herbal Research Institute, are scientists who study herbs and make magical potions out of them. Apparently, Sai was quite interested in this in her previous life, and it was kind of a hobby of hers. And she finds that a lot of the herbs here are basically the same as in her world. So she very quickly starts making friends with the people at the institute, and she gets talking to the director who offers her a job there as a researcher. Now, in this show, it seems like this stuff all just kind of happens because we do see a little bit of behind the scenes, but the light novel, the officials are very aware that she could well be the Saint and not Ira, and that the prince basically alienated her. And so they decide, well, if she wants to go hang out with like a bunch of scientists, that's not really a big problem. It'll keep her in the kingdom, and it's a cheap way to kind of give her what she wants. So Sei moves there and she becomes a researcher. Very early on, though, she discovers that she has an affinity for holy magic. Now, the light novel has a status screen, which they do not have in the show, probably because it's a spoiler, as the status screen lists her class as Saint. I'm not kidding. In the light novel, it says class Saint, holy magic level infinity, which they took out of the show because I guess they wanted to like. It's pretty obvious Sei is the Saint, but they wanted to keep it ambiguous for at least a little while. And she finds out that she has virtually limitless amounts of magical energy in that potions she creates. So potions in this world are created by like an alchemist recipe of herbs and stuff and then imbued with magic. And potions she creates are 50% stronger than standard potions. And this carries on to any kind of other buff she makes. Like if she cooks food with energy boosting properties, that's 50% stronger. Basically everything. Now, something I'm going to have to say that's a little bit kind of cringy is one of the big things that deals they make in this world is that the cooking is terrible. And just like apparently no one in this world has heard about seasoning food. They're like, why would you put like basil and thyme and that kind of stuff into food? That's really weird. I never would have heard of cooking with medicinal herbs. I'm like, come on. People during the Middle Ages knew that you could use all this stuff for um, seasoning as well as for health purposes. I mean, people love garlic, and garlic has all kinds of health purposes. It was used both as a type of medicine and as a food to eat. So the idea that people in this world haven't discovered how to season food is kind of stupid, but she brings them like authentic cooking, and she's like the first person to ever put herbs into food, and it tastes really good. And they find out that the food she makes once again has like gives people extra powers and energizes them and increases their energy levels and makes all that kind of stuff. So Say starts working there. She likes the experience quite a bit. We don't know exactly what she did in her previous life. I'm assuming she was some kind of white collar office worker, but she enjoys doing the science. She enjoys hanging out with her colleagues, and she enjoys making potions. Although she has this natural desire to create potions, she winds up making too many. One of the issues is they can't sell the potions because it would raise too many questions about how they got these supercharged potions that are way stronger than they're supposed to be. But one day they get a call that the Third Order of Knights has been attacked by a salamander in the I think it was the east or I think it was the west forest, and they're badly injured. So they take all of Say's potions there and they start distributing them and healing the knights. And she comes across the commander of the order, who's burned so badly she can barely even like recognize him. And she gives him one of her high potions and gets him to drink it, which almost immediately heals him. Now, the guy she heals is this dude, Albert Hawk, who is a massive Chad. I love him. He's like 6'2", like Aryan Superman who has ice magic, who's like really polite and nice, and obviously he Say's love interest, and their relationship is very wholesome. Say is like an office worker from Japan who they said that she is good looking in general, but she looked awful when she got there because she had been working, like sleeping 3 nights a week and chugging energy drinks for the last 4 or 5 years. But he very quickly takes to her. I mean, if a cute girl saves your life with healing magic, it's not the worst idea to fall in love with them. So it turns out that he is the best friend of the head of the research institute. And we start kind of getting this cabal forming behind the scenes of a lot of the young nobles who like Say, who think that she's probably the saint and kind of want to support her in case people try to abuse her politically. We also find out that um, Say can enchant items and she can make enchantments to items that are theoretically impossible stuff that will do things like resisting all types of magic, resisting all status elements, uh, resisting physical damage, stuff like that. And she kind of gets brought into that by this mage guy who turns out to be Commander Hawk's older brother. I don't think we've met the oldest brother yet. He's the third child. His father is a duke, though. So I don't really know how ranks worked in the medieval era. I don't think they had a formal ranking structure, so I'm not really sure how high up he would be. But he is the third son of like one of the more powerful dukes, and he does command probably about 100 knights or so. So I would imagine he's fairly high up on the ranking scale. I was just trying to think if it made sense, like to marry Say to him, because you'd think they might want to marry her to like the crown prince, although he already has a fiance. The crown prince's younger brother doesn't, but that would provide him with a certain amount of legitimacy that could lead to him usurping the throne. It might be a good idea to just marry her to the second or third son of a noble, as a way of keeping her within the system, but not putting her in a position where her husband can take power. Anyways, so Sai gets introduced to Albert with her boss there, and he basically has decided he's going to ship them and get them together. So he just kind of trolls them relentlessly. And Sai's like, "Oh, he's the dreamiest dude I've ever seen. He's like 6'2", and he's an Aryan Superman." And he's just it's I like the relationship. He's just very gallant with her. Like, she's heading back from the palace, the research institute, so he gives her like a ride on his horse and stuff like that. And he basically asks her on a date to the capital, and they just go around and go shopping and eat lunch together, and it's all very sweet. And he has ice magic, so he like chills her drink for her. And he buys her this expensive hair ornament, and it turns out that in their culture, if you buy a woman jewelry with uh, stones that match the color of your eyes, it's seen as like an intent to seriously court them, if not marry them. Of course, Sai doesn't get this because she's from our world, but pretty early on, she meets this girl named Liz, who I rather like. She's very much a proper lady. They describe her as looking. Sai describes her as looking kind of like a porcelain doll. Once again, just a very like Aryan looking girl, but she's interesting because she's actually quite intelligent and is one of the top students at the university. I kind of like that they made her really like that. One of the smarter, more scholarly female characters isn't like some feminist, like who's really obnoxious, who's like still a girly girl. And her and Sai get along really well, and they quickly become best friends. And once again, it's nice to see a healthy relationship between two women. Like there's no lesbian undertones. There's no like jealousy. There's no them trying to snake each other. They're just two people who have complementary but different personalities who like to spend time together and talk about stuff as they're both interested in a lot of the same topics. So I quite like that. Once again, a lot of the relationships in this are just very kind of wholesome and normal in a good sense. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with slice of life. Um, so as season one goes along, Sai decides to like start experimenting, and she makes magic infused cosmetics. She takes a bunch of the herbs and basically makes them into skin creams, which she accidentally rubs into her eyes, and they cure her eyesight, so she doesn't need to wear glasses anymore. So that's cool. She had done this to try to help out one of Liz's friends who had acne, and of course, the magical cosmetics immediately clears her skin up. Say winds up licensing the recipe to like a merchant and makes a ton of money. Now, Say's not particularly interested in money, so the money tends to go to the research institute's budget, and they have a massive surplus because of all the stuff she's made. The general understanding, I just think, is if Say wants anything, they'll just get it for her, or and like all her living expenses will just kind of be indefinitely covered. The king tries to give her a noble title at some point in land, and she just turns him down. She doesn't know what she would do with it. It's just, I guess, to someone from Aria, being offered like a manor house and land to farm is just something like they wouldn't even get. She's like, I don't know, I couldn't run a house that big. It would be too much for me to clean. Like, I couldn't farm that much. And the king's like, well, you would have servants and vassals for that. She's like, what does that mean? What do you mean I'd have people working for me? I'm used to working for other people. But anyway, so that stuff is all going along. Sorry if this is a little all over the place, but it has a lot of plot lines kind of going on bit by bit. Now we get back to Ira a bit. Remember her, who got summoned and she was declared the official saint, and is hanging out with the prince, who actually turns out to be Liz's fiance. Now the book talks about this a lot more, but basically Ira was just she's like 16 years old and she was scared and depressed, and like say didn't like being summoned either, but her life back in Japan was working for a black company and it was shit. So ultimately, she's like, okay, this is way better. Actually, they're kind of concerned about her given the hours she works at the research institute, because she's used to working like Japanese hours. So she actually starts to get antsy when they try to give her days off. But Ira Kate was spoiled from a wealthy family, and she really misses her parents. And the prince feels really bad about it, so he tries to just spoil her and give her like anything she wants. And he's kind of got in his clique of young nobles to kind of support her, much as Sai's developing hers. Something I like is, so people say this is like a reverse harem show. I don't really get that. Sai has a bunch of male friends, but Albert is clearly her only love interest. Even if the other guys might like her, they just it's not really portrayed that way at all. Like her boss just kind of views her as like a little sister, as a friend, and then there's like Jude, who's a researcher, and just all the other kind of like attractive male figures around her. None of them really seem to be romantically interested in her. They all pretty much agree that like Commander Hawk is a Chad, and they aren't going to out Chad the 6'2" Aryan Superman with ice magic. So why even try? Okay, so the prince starts forming around the other girl. Now Ira's from Japan, so she doesn't understand that it's bad to hang out with men who already have fiancés, especially if you don't have one yourself. Now Sai is kind of too naive to realize it, and she's not used to like Aryan Superman courting her. So basically, everybody knows that Albert is courting her except for her. So it's kind of okay for her to be with other men because she's viewed as being spoken for, I guess you could say. She's not like the seductress. She already has somebody who she's in a relationship with, even if she doesn't understand it. They do, I think, they don't deal with it a lot, but I do find kind of the culture shock aspects of this fairly amusing. Now, the First Order of Knights gets attacked, and they get really badly beat up. They run out of healing potions, actually, and they can't heal them all. Sei decides to start using magic, though. The Grand Magus who summoned her had woken up and determined that she has, well, basically impossibly high holy magic affinity. And she just begins using her holy magic to heal the knights. She's able to heal fatal wounds. There's a dude who lost his arm, and she's able to regenerate that. So she basically saves all these guys' lives, and they basically start worshiping her. And it becomes pretty obvious that given her immense holy powers, she is probably the saint. Now, Ira is no pushover herself. We haven't seen a ton of her, but she apparently has affinities for all types of magic. And her level, because they don't have levels in the show, but in the book they do. And she grows incredibly fast, faster than any other mage in recent history. So even when Sei gets declared the saint, she asks that Ira be allowed to join the Royal Magi Assembly, and she basically becomes the like apprentice to the Grand Magus. So she treats her defeated rival, as it were. Sei really doesn't want to be the saint though, because she likes just like doing research, hanging out at the library, stuff like that. She preferred to have kind of a simpler life, but it's pretty obvious that she kind of can't it can't to the same extent that she might want to. That being said, the kingdom is a bit kind of confused about that because to a certain extent, giving her a low profile and keeping her identity like something of an open secret could be helpful because her abilities are so great that if someone was to kidnap her and use her, they could make like legendary magical items. They could make healing potions that can heal any wound. Basically, if a small country was to get their hands on her, they could conquer half the world in a very short amount of time. So her kind of being somewhat of a recluse and not making too many public appearances turns out to be a good thing. I do once again kind of like how this show deals with a lot of the like social niceties and stuff. This is shojo, and though, and I think that's something I do like about shojo and stuff that seems like it's shojo is how it does kind of look at the interpersonal relationships a bit more, how characters interact with their culture, what are kind of the social implications of things. I find shonen generally doesn't do that, and it is kind of nice to have a bit of variety. So season one comes to a close with Sai being recognized as the saint, um, and that's kind of it for season one. It's is there an ongoing plot? Sort of. Is there an antagonist? Not really. Is there anything really kind of dark or creepy or evil? No, it's just kind of a feel good show. Like part of season one near the end is she goes to a place called Klosner's Domain where most of the world's uh, magical herbs come from, and they get her to regenerate the land using her saint powers. And we just get a lot of like slice of life stuff, like her developing things or going to parties or learning to dance or stuff like that. Once again, it's very shoujo-y, very slice of lifey. Now, season two is currently airing, and I'd say it's pretty similar in quality. You have just a lot more kind of slice of life stuff happening. There's obviously the big grand ball because we have to have that. There's a guy who comes from a China analog, and she helps him make something to heal his mother. There's kind of a funny part where they go to a port, and she finds a merchant from a faraway land, and he has like rice and soybeans and red bean paste and all like the Japanese stuff, and she's just super excited. She's just like, I thought I'd never taste rice again. And that was kind of cute. But once again, it's like a show where we don't really have this giant meta narrative per se. It's just kind of Sai living her life with a bunch of other likable characters doing wholesome stuff in a medieval setting. And if that's your thing, if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, you just want something very laid back, very fun, then yeah, I would definitely recommend this one, but it's definitely not for everybody. I can see why someone would think this is generic, cringy, and difficult to watch. But like I said, one of the most aggressively shojo things I think I've ever seen. Give it a try or don't. God bless everybody, and more content to come.